If you like seeing lands get blown to smithereens, then today you're in the right place, because we're going to do just that over and over again. Today's deck is all about getting the most out of Ghost Quarter, a land that can be sacrificed to destroy another land. We're going to abuse Ghost Quarter by repetitively recurring it from our graveyard with new addition Deeproot Wayfinder and Renegade Rallier. We can also tutor for our Ghost Quarter with Knight of the Reliquary, a value-based green-white creature that grows to enormous proportions in this shell. And all of these cornerstone creatures can be summoned using everybody's favorite green instant, Collected Company, which necessitates a large density of low-cost creatures to function well. But when looking closer at the deck list, I noticed something peculiar. The original build of this brew was lacking Force of Vigor, the most powerful green sideboard card ever printed, and a spell that can also blow up lands in the right situation. So I added one in, and I was glad I did, because our first match was against Affinity. Having gotten run over by an army of robots in Game 1, my opening 7 in Game 2 had Knight of Autumn, an excellent piece of interaction against an artifact deck, so I decided to keep. I start Game 2 blazing out of the gates with an ignoble Hierarch, and pass the turn back to my opponent. They lead off their turn 1 with a basic island into a Springleaf Drum, which gives my Knight a nice target for the next turn. I eat the drum with the Knight's ability and pass the turn back. My opponent continues their explosive start with a turn 2 Urza Saga, and does nothing else. Moving to my turn, I draw, and Ghost Quarter makes its first appearance off the top of my deck. I crack for 3 with a Knight, and then I decide to build out my board state for the turn, playing out my Nissa, playing out the Quarter, triggering Nissa, and then casting out my Innkeeper to set up a hard cast Solitude next turn if I need it. My opponent spends their turn playing out a second Urza Saga as I think to myself how nice it would be to draw Force of Vigor off the top. And boom, just like that, as requested, Force of Vigor shows up, aka Double Stone Rain. I'll lead off by attacking with the team, putting my opponent down to 11, and pass priority back to them not making a move yet because I want to play around Metallic Rebuke. My opponent makes their move at the end of turn, creating a lowly construct, which gives me the opening to hardcast the Force of Vigor and blow up both of their sagas. Pure devastation. My opponent's resolve is stronger than I anticipated though, as they don't scoop on the spot. A few 0-drop artifacts hit the board, buffing their construct up to a 4/4. Drawing into a Temple Garden, I play it out, trigger Nissa, Solitude down the construct, and swing with a 4/4 Nissa, which is met by a Dismember. No biggie. But the pressure is on my opponent to do something for which they cast a Thoughtcast on their turn, and they pass back. My draw step yields a Gavany Township, which has the ability to pump my entire team and turn each creature into a viable threat. I play it out for the turn, attack with my entire team, pump my entire team, putting my opponent down to 1 life. The Artifact Enthusiast takes one more turn and then scoops the game, seeing the writing on the wall. Game 3 was much the same as an early Force of Vigor wiped an Urza Saga and Springleaf Drum off the board, a devastating blow for which they are unable to come back from. While this match was fun and we blew up some lands, you didn't quite get to see the power of Ghost Quarter. But our next match is another story. We pick things up turn 3 of Game 1 where my opponent has just established Tron. A Karn Liberated hits the board, which eats my Deeproot Wayfinder, possibly a little bit of a mistake, as my Nissa can now attack the Karn and knock it down. I draw into my 5th land, but instead of playing out my Elesh Norn to prevent a potential Golos trigger, I decide to play it safe and leave my Collected Company up for the end of my opponent's turn. I pass it back, and to rub it in my face, of course, my opponent leads on a Chromatic Star and then plays out their Golos. It could be worse, I suppose. Sticking to the plan, I cast my Coco at the end of turn and find myself a pair of Knights, a Knight of Autumn and a Knight of the Reliquary. I make the mistake of hitting Golos with my Knight of Autumn trigger, not noticing that my opponent played out an Expedition map earlier their turn. I should have killed Golos with my Solitude rather than the play I made. It's all good though, because things are about to get out of control. Add a mana with a Forest, sacrifice it to Knight of the Reliquary's ability, search for a Ghost Quarter, swing for 5, and start to get to work on my opponent's draw step, knocking down one of their Tron pieces. They proceed to search for the missing Tron piece with their map and cast out an Engineered Explosives for 3. Boom goes the Dynamite. Savage. They follow up with the Gigantha, but fortunately I can rebuild with my second Collected Company, and I do just that, grabbing another Knight of the Reliquary and a Giver of Runes to protect it. Drawing into a Deeproot Wayfinder on my following turn means I can get my Ghost Quarter engine completely online, and I do just that. I proceed to Solitude down the Gigantha and Ghost Quarter them off of Tron and out of the game for good this time. And you won't believe what happened next as I snagged victory in Game 3 on a Mole to 4. I kept a 4-card hand on the strength of a turn 2 Knight of the Reliquary and figured I'd give it a go. And while drawing into a turn 2 Knight is great, drawing a Ghost Quarter, followed up by a Deeproot Wayfinder to perpetually keep my opponent off of Tron is even better. I mow down the first land and my opponent has seen enough. My final match of this league also showcased the power of Ghost Quarter, and if it wasn't for a huge punt in a critical moment, I could have had the dub. I lead on a turn 1 Ignoble and pass back to my opponent, who happens to be the current trophy leader. They lead on a turn 1 Amulet of Vigor, and staring at my Ghost Quarter in hand, my mouth starts to water. Ghost Quarter's ability to nab Karoo lands before they had the opportunity to untap off of the Amulet of Vigor trigger will seriously stifle my opponent's game plan. Over the next few turns, it was just that, as my opponent was unable to leverage their Amulet of Vigor due to the impending Ghost Quarter on the other side of the table. This was exemplified by my opponent's turn 2 play, where they simply cast out an Expedition map and passed the turn back. Over the next 2 turns, I saw an opportunity to get aggressive, so I chipped in with my Prosperous Innkeeper and cast out a Knight of the Reliquary. I continued to hold up the Ghost Quarter during their next turn, and they were unable to do anything. I drew into a second Collected Company, swung in with the Prosperous Innkeeper once again, activated my Knight of the Reliquary to get another Ghost Quarter, and made my first critical error of underestimating my opponent and overextending myself on my turn. I Ghost Quartered their forest, which essentially accomplished nothing, and then Renegade Rallyered it back into play. I should have stopped there, but I didn't, and left myself with very few resources. My opponent knew what they were doing and were setting me up until we reached the critical turn of the game. I had chipped my opponent down to a lowly 6 life, and on the next turn could give my 10/10 Knight of the Reliquary protection from green to swing it in for the victory. But not for nothing, my opponent is a trophy leader for a reason, and they wiggle their way out of a seemingly unwinnable situation. They were somehow able to stick a Primeval Titan on the board through my double Ghost Quarters and found themselves 2 Valakut the Molten Pinnacles. Now, I don't know about you, but I find the rules associated with this card quite confusing. In the moment, my thought was that if I destroyed one of the Valakuts, none of the triggers would resolve, and my opponent would no longer have the requisite 5 other lands in play to trigger the card. Without thinking, I popped my quarter on the Valakut, but 2 of the triggers still resolved to my dismay. My Giver of Runes was wiped off the board, and my chance of nabbing the 4/1 went down the drain. Props to my opponent for seeing the lines and savagely outplaying me. Nonetheless, this deck put up a strong 3-2 performance that was a ton of fun to play, because let's be honest, what's not to love about Collected Company and Ghost Quarter? Thank you all for tuning in once more. I will see you again very soon, and you know the deal, everybody. Be well.